record. So good evening, and we are here to learn all about cicadas with their upcoming emergence. This is a topic that only comes around once every 17 years, so it's hard to remember exactly what happened the last time and what impact those cicadas might have had on your landscape. And it's also sometimes difficult to understand what purpose do they serve. So Dr. Leskey works at the USDA Appalachian Fruit Research Center in Carneysville. She loves cicadas. She's very excited to talk about this topic. She's an entomologist too, so she's definitely well versed in their biology. So she's going to give us a brief overview of cicadas, and she's also, then we're going to have a lot of time for Q&A. So this is a meeting format. I encourage everybody to please stay muted while Dr. Leskey is giving her talk. If you have questions, we'll save them we have a lot of time set aside for Q&A, but you can also just go ahead and type them in the chat function down at the bottom of your screen. There's probably a little speech bubble that says chat. You can type them in real time, and we can get them in the order that they come in once she gets to the end of her overview of cicadas. If you want to ask a question, we'll have time for you to unmute yourselves and do so live there as well. If you do come unmuted, I do have the power to remute you, and I am not afraid to use it. So for the sake of cleanliness, this just helps us all stay organized and be respectful of her time. So I will turn it over to Tracy.
Thank you, and thank you for the invitation. Let me do the most difficult thing I'm going to do, which is share my screen. Let's see. Okay. Are you seeing my full screen with cicadas? Can somebody let me know?
We are, yes.
Okay, perfect. That's the most important thing. Okay, so tonight I'm going to talk to you about Mighty Brood 10 and what I like to refer to as magical cicadas. If you didn't know, they belong to the genus Cicada. And so, you know, I know that there is a lot of media right now that's saying, oh my gosh, cicadas are menacing. There are going to be swarms of cicadas that are going to invade buffalo, or you thought murder hornets were scary. Watch out, 2021 is going to be even worse with periodical cicadas. But what I want to do tonight is to talk about cicadas with you, but more so, I want to convince you that they're not menacing. So the first thing before we go any further, though, I want to dispel a rumor. Cicadas are not locusts. Locusts are actually short-horned grasshoppers. And so those are the insects that we think of, you know, that can cause devastating plagues in parts of Africa. So cicadas are not locusts, just so everybody's on the same page. However, cicadas are magical. And so throughout this talk, what you'll see when I have some of the biologically really interesting things that they do, I've created Easter eggs. And if you're aware of Easter eggs, like you watch a movie or something, you know, they'll put Easter eggs, little surprises in the movie. I put little Easter eggs with a picture of Harry Potter in them to highlight all of the magical things about cicadas for all of you. So to begin with, who are cicadas? Where do they belong? Well, actually, cicadas, of course, are an insect. They belong to, in taxonomic terms, the class Insecta. They are within the order Hemiptera, which is the group that contains all of the true bugs. So there are over 80,000 species, and these include aphids. Unfortunately, our friend, the brown marmorated stink bugs in that group, plant hoppers, and of course, cicadas. And so this group has what is referred to as piercing, sucking mouth parts, that proboscis that they use to suck the sap from plants. But some species like bed bugs also feed on vertebrate blood, but most of them are honestly vegetarians, so that's okay. So the family Cicadidae, which is not easy for me to say, there are about 3,000 different species of cicadas worldwide. Periodical and annual cicadas are both found in North America, but across the world, the only place they exist are periodical cicadas are in North America. And that's one of the reasons that they're magical. You will not find something like this anywhere else in the world. So we're really lucky to have them. And I'll have you believing me by the end. Okay, so annual or dog day cicadas versus periodical cicadas. What is the difference? Well, annual or dog day cicadas actually don't have an annual life cycle. They actually have 2 to 5 year life cycles, but we do see them annually. So usually in the late summer, you'll see these large green cicadas. They're usually pretty good flyers. They make a lot of noise, do a lot of buzzing, just like periodical cicadas. But again, 2 to 5 year life cycles. Periodical cicadas, however, have either 13 or 17 year life cycles. These are very distinct, very long lived. And so when you're going to meet these cicadas as they start to emerge in a couple of weeks, remember, these things are 17 years old. They're probably older than your children, in some cases, your dog. These are really the senior citizens of the insect world. These are the longest lived insects. So it really is a unique aspect about this group of insects. Now, with periodical cicadas, there are actually a couple of different species. And for 17-year cicadas, there are 3 different species, and I've listed the species names here. And the way they are identified, really it's about their morphology or shape and color, their behavior, and the different kinds of calls that they have. Then there are also 4 different species of 13-year cicadas, and actually 13-year cicadas are really very similar in terms of how they look and the kinds of calls that they do to at least one of the 17 years. So there's a lot of evolutionary relationships as they've evolved over time, and we'll talk more about that a little later. But one interesting thing that you may not know is that when we have brood 10 emerge, it's not just a single species. There are going to be multiple species in that brood that are 17-year cicadas. So most of what we have is this first species, this Cicada septendecim. That's what is the main species that makes up our brood 10, but there are some of these other species as well, which is really interesting. And so this is actually just some of the specimens that are housed at the Smithsonian. And they have collections that they've been taking from emergences of the broods, different broods across the country every year going back to the 1800s. And so we keep voucher specimens in the Smithsonian to ensure that if they start to change and we start to see differences, evolutionary differences, we have that record. And so those specimens are maintained. Okay, so what is the life cycle of a cicada? There's a general life cycle for all cicadas, and really the big difference is the amount of time they spend beneath ground. So right now we have, with the red arrow right here, these late instar nymphs that are crawling to the surface, getting closer and closer. They can be at depths up to 8 feet feeding when they spend their time beneath the soil. But they are going to the surface. And so right now, if you go out and you would flip some rocks in the forest and things like that, you might find some cicadas very close to the surface. Or if you're gardening, you might come across some of these in your garden because they are getting closer to the surface. But at any rate, they will come to the surface, they will emerge, they will climb up on a vertical structure like a fence post, a tree, something like that, and they will molt. Then as their exoskeleton hardens, they will then become a full-fledged adult and begin mating. Then the females will lay eggs, and then those eggs will hatch. The nymphs will fall to the ground, and this little cicada is going to spend 17 years living in darkness, not seeing the light of day again, feeding on plant sap for 17 years. I think that's magical. Or you could think of them as small vampires down in the soil in the darkness, feeding on plant sap. So little sort of vegetarian, vampires. So, but at any rate, that's their general life cycle. So this is where we are right now, these late instar nymphs. And one of the things and one of the strategies, and again, I think this makes them magical, they crawl from the soil around sunset so they can avoid some of those daytime predators. So you wake up in the morning and you see this, what we call their cast skin, when they start to leave this behind on the ground or sitting there on a fence post. That's because they emerged at night. So they'll climb on that structure, molt, And the time that we're going to see them come out of the ground is when soil temperatures remain around 64 degrees for a period of time consistently. And so we should see emergence in a couple of weeks by mid-May in all likelihood. This is the kind of holes that they leave behind and when they are emerging, and you can see some of the cast skins as well on the ground. And you can see, and we'll talk more about this, but this is something that's really good for the soil. I mean, it's kind of, they're like natural aerators for the soil as they make their way to the surface. So when they emerge, and maybe you guys remember this from 2004, they are what we've referred to as teneral, meaning they're soft, white, and their exoskeleton, their hard outer shell, has to undergo what is referred to as cuticular sclerotization. It's kind of like tanning, like when you think of leather. And so it just hardens up. And so over a couple of days, these guys will harden up. You can see this one is recently molded. And then down here below, you can see this one is closer to be really sclerotized. But certainly the thing that it will pop out at everybody are those red eyes. And so that's the way you know that you have periodical cicadas. Some of the references that are out in the literature indicate that adults do not feed. This is not true, but it hasn't been as well studied as we would hope. And so we kind of, in my lab group, along with some colleagues, want to dispel this myth. And so this year we are going to do what we call CSI, which does not stand for crime scene investigation. It stands for cicada science investigation. And so we're going to go out and try to record the plants on which we see them feeding. And here you can see their proboscis feeding on the sap. They're not going to damage your plants because of this kind of feeding. It's really just a drink. And, you know, they need to stay hydrated. But what we don't know is the kind of plants that they like to feed on. And so we are going to use some techniques to identify the plant DNA they have in their guts to find out what these periodical cicadas actually are feeding on when they come out. Really, where are they getting a drink to keep themselves hydrated? So it's kind of one of these interesting things that still is not as well understood, even though we've been studying cicadas and people have been tracking them for hundreds of years. So when you're outside, how do you tell the difference between a male and a female cicada? This is just two of photographs to show you that. So the male here on the right, you can see this is the tip of his abdomen. It's wider, it's a little rounded, whereas the female has this very pointy abdomen. And that is actually what we refer to as her ovipositor or her egg laying device. So that is what she's going to use to insert eggs into the tips of shoots of trees and things like that. That's where they lay their eggs. So that's male and female. So what do males do? Well, one of the big jobs for males is to attract a female for mating. And they use a ridged organ. It's called a timbal, and it's circled here, that can vibrate quickly and produce sounds. And one thing that, again, making them magical, some people may say annoying, I say magical, the sounds that they make can be actually louder than a lawnmower. And so if you guys recall back to previous broods, it can get really loud out there. So think of it as like a big boy band. They're all getting together. They're trying to find females. Now the females will answer their calls with a flicked wing sound, but it's not the same as the males. And the males will actually group together and sing in chorus. And so I have a few recordings that for those of you who know Will Hirschberger, that were part of his Songs of Insects recordings for his book. And I thought I'd just play a couple for you so you can hear what they sound like even before they emerge. So this is males chorusing together. So think of them as the choir. This is what we'll be hearing when they're all together. And again, they really start to, it's kind of in unison. It's really interesting. Now, males' individual mating calls vary among species, as I mentioned earlier. And this is just one of those calls. So sweet. Okay. And then the last one is a distress call. So if you pick them up, Cicadas don't bite. They're not going to hurt you, but boy, they'll try to make you think that they could hurt you with this kind of sound. So they get upset when you handle them. They're trying to, you know, sort of scare predators and that kind of thing. So those are the kinds of sounds that males can make. Okay. So what happens when they finally meet up? Well, they remain they remain in copula for about an hour. They'll mate for about an hour. And the male actually inserts it's called a copulatory plug, which curtails further males from mating with that female. And so that ensures his paternity of the eggs that she'll lay. Now, males will continue to mate until they die. And so that's their job. That's all they're going to do until they die over the next few weeks. After the female has been mated, she is going to begin laying eggs several days later. Now, this is where we think about the kind of potential damage they can do. Eggs are laid in slits that they create in branches that are about 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch in diameter. So pretty small tree branches. And these sites are called egg nests. And so a female will insert anywhere from about 5 to 20 eggs in a single egg nest. And a female can lay up to 500 eggs in her lifetime if she isn't picked off by someone. And this little picture at the top, you can see her ovipositor from the tip of her abdomen where she is going to be inserting those eggs. Then the eggs, about a month later, 6 weeks later, they begin to hatch. And this tiny little nymph that you see here will drop to the ground to begin the cycle again. It will crawl into the soil, and that will start that 17-year clock again. Now, this is the kind of damage that you see when they insert their eggs in the tips of these shoots. They can cause these shoots to flag and die. And so this is the kind of damage we see during a cicada year. And again, that nymphal stage, once they go into the soil, it is very long and very dark. And they're going to just feed on roots in the soil and tunnel through the soil. Again, I mentioned earlier, they can be as deep as 8 feet. And again, they're going to remain in that soil for nearly 17 years. So periodical cicada broods. We actually have 15 active broods that are recognized within the United States. This is a map put out by U.S. Forest Service. One of the co-authors, Sandy Leopold, he's in Morgantown. And so this is a pretty accurate map, although I'll talk a little bit about some of the differences that we may see later. But you can see in our region, most of what we see is brood 10, highlighted in yellow. But you can also see that brood 10 is going to be emerging in Ohio and parts of Indiana, as well as, a few counties down here in Tennessee as well. And then you can see the other, both 17 and 13-year broods throughout the East. Now, what are broods? Broods, this was something that was created by an entomologist named Charles Marlett, who was with the Bureau of Entomology, which was kind of a precursor to what we think of as USDA. And so he assigned Roman numerals for what he thought was each brood. And he assigned actually 30 different broods based on geography and whether they were 17 or 13-year life cycles, and based on their emergence date. Now, some of those were probably the same brood, and so over time, some of those brood numbers have gone away. And so, like I mentioned previously, there are only 15 active broods recognized. Now, there are 2 recognized broods, one from Connecticut and one from the Florida Panhandle, that we think have gone extinct as well. So why do we have these broods, and why do they last for 17 and 13 years? One of the sort of hypotheses is that a lot of this is based on evolution back to the Pleistocene period, about 1.8 million years ago, when glaciers repeatedly advanced and retreated kind of unpredictably. And so a good strategy to avoid a cold and killing summer was just to stay underground as long as possible. And so as these glaciers retreated over time, we had these different broods evolve. Now, some people say that this whole process goes back 4 million years, but everybody kind of agrees it's probably related to glaciation and receding glacier events. And so cicadas emerge again every 13 and 17 years, and they actually emerge on these interesting prime numbers of 13 and 17 years. And another aspect that's kind of interesting, and this was something that some researchers did. There was a Cornell ornithologist along with Sandy Leopold who did some of this work. They found a lot of people think, oh, well, the bird population just explodes, you know, when you have cicadas. But actually, the years that they emerge, with some 15 common species that we have in these regions, the populations, the bird populations are actually lowest. 2 years later, the bird population explodes, but the cicadas actually may be synchronizing their emergence with the boom and bust sort of life cycles of key bird predators over time, which is kind of interesting. Okay, so periodical cicada broods, are these maps correct? On the right, you can see check marks, the green check marks. Those are all the broods that I've ever interacted with in different places. And where I grew up in Western PA, you can see the yellow right here on the county where I grew up. It says we have brood 10, but in fact, I know that we have brood 5. I was there for 2 of those events, the last of which was in 2016, and I verified and sent that information in. And I'm going to give you information where you can send this in so that these maps can be more and more accurate. The site and the app that you can get is referred to as cicadasafari.org. And so Jean Kritsky, who is leading this project, you can report your sightings, and it's a smartphone app, and they want to know when we're seeing brood 10, and they're often able to identify the species if you send them a good picture, which of the 3 species it may be. Now, they also even want off years. And what are off years? Well, unfortunately, sometimes cicadas, their clock isn't quite right for whatever reason. And so we refer to them as periodical stragglers, which I had to point out was not the name of a band. It's actually what we refer to cicadas that emerge earlier or later than the rest of the brood. And so generally they're off by 1 and 4 year increments most of the time. But in fact, we just saw periodical cicadas I think it was 2 years ago, that were probably brood 10 that were off cycle and what we refer to as periodical stragglers. So a lot of times it's 4 years though. And so like a 17-year will emerge 4 years earlier, almost like a 13-year life cycle. And one of the interesting things that's happening with brood 10 right now is that there are larger and larger groups of stragglers, it seems. In 2017, again, 4 years ago, in both Washington, D.C. area, as well as Southwest Ohio, there was a very large emergence of brood 10 cicadas 4 years early. They actually mated and laid eggs. So there may be a new 13-year brood emerging locally as well that is sort of evolving from a 17-year brood. So that's really interesting. And it's why it's just so interesting to follow these guys and report these sightings both on off years. Okay, so what kind of damage can we expect? So this is typically what you see on our larger trees, and they love things like a lot of our hardwoods, maples, oaks, that kind of thing. And so you'll see the tips of the shoots dying back. But is it really a problem for the tree? In the case of orchardists, it can be. And so orchardists can control them if they have to or need to, especially on younger trees. But it's generally just the best thing to do is just not plant trees during a cicada year. And that's what most growers do. And it's sort of a known thing. Just don't plant during a cicada year. And then in your backyard, like I said, there could be large numbers, but older backyard trees and forest trees can handle them. It kind of provides natural pruning. and the bodies themselves, as they decay away, provide a lot of nutrients for the soil. However, what do you do if you have younger trees? Well, you can bag them, and it does work. And so that protects them from egg laying. And as I talked about earlier, it's smaller trees, generally trees that are less than 6 feet tall, and it's those 1/4 inch to 3/8 inch diameter limbs that are favored. Now, if you're an entomologist, you'd think you'd remember this, but I didn't remember. And so what did I do? I planted a maple in my backyard last fall. And so it's not very tall. And I just got my net today and I went out to just make sure it was going to work. And so in a couple of weeks, I'll net that through the oviposition period just to protect that tree, because it's about 6 feet tall, but all of those branches, the little limbs, would be very appealing to periodical cicadas for egg laying. So bottom line is there is some damage, but overall they're really mostly beneficial. They prune mature trees, they aerate soil as they crawl through, both as nymphs and beginning the last instar for the adult stage. When they die, their bodies are an important source of nutrients. And when they come out, it's like a smorgasbord for just about everybody that has an insectivorous diet. So there are certainly lots of birds that get them, frogs, skunks, possums. I have possums digging them up in my yard right now, the nymphs that are close to the surface. I've seen them doing it. So that's some of the basic stuff about cicadas. I wanted to tell you a few other things about cicadas that are kind of interesting. One is cicada killer wasps, and you've probably seen these here in the Eastern Panhandle. Cicada killer wasps do not feed on periodical cicadas. They feed exclusively on annual, or those dog day cicadas, the big green ones. Their life cycles are not synchronized with the periodical cicadas. They're synchronized with the annual cicadas. And so how they do things is they just immobilize the cicada with a sting. They take it to a burrow where in the soil where they actually lift one of the eggs or legs on the cicada and they lay their egg beneath. And that will become the developing cicada wasp larva. And so that's what they do. They're not aggressive. They really just want to be left alone and go find a cicada, but they are big and buzzy for sure. But what other cool things about cicadas in general? Well, one thing I wanted to mention is this whole notion of what's referred to as bio-inspiration, where we take inspiration from the biology around us. And one of the things that researchers have learned, and one of my colleagues at the University of Illinois has learned, is that cicada wings have a special sort of nanoparticle surface on their wings that not only repels water, but prevents bacteria from establishing on the surface. And so they've been able to fabricate kind of or replicate the nanostructures that are found on cicada wings. And so this may lead to new technologies, for example, for keeping medical equipment dry or bacterial growth down. And so, you know, cicadas really have some really interesting and I would say magical properties to offer the human race. One of the things that's not necessarily magical for the cicadas, but you'll see it while this is happening, is what we refer to as zombie cicadas. There is actually a fungus, Massospora cicadina, which was identified by a couple of pathologists, including Matt Casson at WVU, that infects nymphal cicadas. And so when they come to the surface, it begins to grow. And when it grows in the adult cicada, it actually will castrate the male. And so all that is left is this kind of fungal growth on the tip of their abdomen that is now missing. But they don't miss it. They just keep trying to mate. And while they're mating, they're spreading those spores all over the place. So it's kind of the fungus has turned them into a zombie to keep the fungus going. So watch for zombie cicadas. Blue-eyed cicadas. This is another really interesting thing about the periodical cicadas. It's a 1 in a million chance of finding them, but you will see blue-eyed and also white-eyed cicadas out there. During the last 2004, I found a blue-eyed cicada. I picked it up, I looked at it, showed my group, my lab group, and then I threw it back out because I wouldn't want to kill it. I want to keep that genetic variation in the population. But you'll see these urban legends about cash prizes for blue-eyed cicadas. There was somebody actually offering prizes at some point, but not now. But if you get a chance and you're out there, look for these blue-eyed cicadas because it's really this vibrant turquoise blue. And again, 1 in a million. Cicada recipes. Now, I will caution you if you have a shellfish allergy, which I do, so I can't embark on a cicada recipe. But for example, and I'm not even going to guess if it's magical or not, but certainly there are nice recipes out there for dry roasted cicadas and things like that. Actually, insects are really good, high in protein, low in fat food, and there is a whole sort of movement to eat more insects and farm insects for food. So, and I'm certain my colleague, Mike Raup, he's called the bug guy, he'll be eating them on Good Morning America one morning when they are out. So that is my talk. And actually during Brood 2 emergence in New Jersey and New York, I wrote this piece for The Guardian about cicadas being magical, not menacing. And like I said in that article, my advice is to take the time to admire these spectacular senior citizens of the insect world, because it's going to be a long time before the magic of Cicada returns to your neighborhood. That's all I have. I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
So if anyone has specific questions, feel free to unmute yourself. Oh, there's one in the chat. Alan asks, if I recall, 17 years ago, the 17-year cicada and 13-year cicada came out at the same time. Do they interbreed, and would this explain some of the 17-year cicadas coming out 4 years early?
No, that's a good question. So right now, they are considered distinct species, so they're probably not interbreeding, but there is, with this overlap, and we think it has to do with climate change, there may be shortening of these life cycles based on 4-year increments. And so you can have 17 years, we think, moving into a 13-year life cycle. And so you get this overlap of these different broods.
Another question from Margie on where can you purchase the netting for small trees?
I just jumped on Amazon the other night, I'll be honest with you. And mine is a basic mosquito kind of netting. It was about $20 for the one that I'm going to use on my tree.
And I've also found it on Amazon under the label bird netting. You just need to make sure that the holes are 1/4 inch or less.
Yep.
And then on a larger scale, there's a place called industrial netting too, where you can purchase, but that's more for if you planted a few fruit trees and you have a lot to cover.
Yeah.
Kathy asks, how do you know what brood they are when they come out in an off year?
No, that's a good question. And we assume that we know what brood is present in a particular location, but that's why we want to do this documentation, because like where I grew up in Somerset County, they have brood 10, but they also have on the western half of the county, brood 5. And so these Cicada Safari and the folks at University of Connecticut are trying to get a better handle on who is who and where. Because it's 3 different species in a particular location. So it's a good question, and it still is, like I said, there's a general, we know most of it, but there can be some discrepancies for sure.
And Wendy's question was the same as that one. And Sandy asks, so we really only have to worry about trees. What about garden plants and other things?
Garden plants should be pretty safe. Yep. It's really deciduous trees that they lay eggs in for the most part.
And now I have a question in that same line of thought, Tracy. When they swarm, is there the chance they will swarm in a garden area, or like you said, they only kind of like to go vertically? So
They're
trees.
going to land on everything in your yard. They're going to land on your yew bushes and your butterfly bush and things like that. So you're going to see them on a lot of things, but where they're laying eggs is going to be on the tips of branches of hardwood trees. But they're going to be on everything. Yeah.
I don't remember the last time I saw them, but I'll just say I couldn't drive yet, and I was several years away from being able to drive, but I was a little young.
Yeah.
And another question, how do they all coordinate coming to the surface after 17 years? That's a really good question.
Oh, I know. And that's like, the genetics behind that and how they all have these just clocks that allow them to emerge so synchronously and sort of overwhelm, because the idea is that they're going to overwhelm predators because there are so many of them. All the predators become sated, and then they can go about, the ones that are left can go about the business of reproducing. Yeah.
And another question, is there a distinction between damage to young trees versus shrubs that are lower to the ground?
Not that I'm aware of, no. I would say it's really just, it's mainly, like I said, deciduous hardwoods that they're after. There are sites that you can look at, though. There are about 70 different species that they will lay eggs in. But, in the years where I've sort of observed them, maple is really one of their favorites. I always see them, lots of flag shoots on maple. Oak as well, but maple is one, really. That's the one we'll see a lot.
So for your advice, if I am thinking about landscaping my yard with bushes this year, is that something that I would need to worry about, or maybe just hold off planting till fall to be safe?
Bushes. So look on those lists, because I don't want to say the wrong thing, but there are lists. But really, it's usually not bushes that they're after. It's trees. But yeah, if you were going to plant it, I wouldn't plant a tree right now, a small maple tree for sure.
I'll see if I can find a link and put that in the chat.
Yeah.
Another question is, how does development, like housing and business development, affect the cicadas and their broods?
Yeah, it can affect a lot, and we can lose cicadas that way, where if all of the trees are taken out and something is paved over, I mean, we'll lose, portions of populations. And, if there's a tree nearby and then a parking lot there, if the cicadas, because, the roots of the tree are kind of just cover as much surface area as the above ground part. So if they come up in the wrong spot, they can get caught under a paved area and never make it to the surface.
And Kevin's question is, what do you think about the cicadas' connection to prime numbers?
I know, and I was reading about that, Kevin, and there's a theory. Let's see, because let's see, how does it go? Kevin Webb, I will talk to you about this. I know him. I'll talk to him about it. But there's some evolutionary theory behind why prime numbers.
Christina's question is, her fruit trees, about 20 of them, are 2 to 3 years old, and she's wondering if should she cover them, or will they be okay since they are a few years old?
I mean, I would say they should be okay, but it depends on how tall they are. I mean, 6 feet is kind of when they're larger than 6 feet, they're able to tolerate it, but you still may incur some damage on the tips and lose some growth. So if you can cover them, you may want to cover them if it's possible. If it's too much, you may just have to, you just may have some damage on the tips.
And related to species, someone asked a question about figs, persimmons, pear, and plum trees, if those are favorable species.
Pear and plum, I know they'll lay eggs in. I'm not sure about figs and persimmons.
And another question on how do you net a tree? So you did have that helpful picture.
You know what? When I do it for real, I'm gonna tie it at the bottom on the trunk, so it's just like a bag over the tree. So think of it like bagging a
I
tree.
think you can really just use zip ties too. Sometimes the
Absolutely,
netting
that
comes
was
in a
my point.
long.
Yeah, gotta love a zip tie.
Yeah, I think they come in just a long sheath and you just cut it to fit and then just basically put it around and then zip tie
Yeah,
it. It's good enough
yeah,
for anything else on the farm. It's good enough for your trees too.
exactly. I'm looking up to see if I can see if persimmon. But because I've never seen persimmon or fig on one of their host lists. But go ahead. More questions?
I think we're all caught up unless anybody, oh, there's one more. Is there an organic spray you can use to protect your fruit trees?
No, not anything that, because they're gonna feed through the bark. It may deter them. I mean, you could try an oil, it may deter them, but I'm thinking maybe not. I've never read that somebody's used like a horticultural oil to deter cicadas.
There are a few things approved for use on cicadas,
Mm-hmm.
but I believe most, if not all of them, are only available to commercial tree fruit growers.
And those are contact insecticides, so not necessary, and they're not going to be that effective anyway, because they're going to
Right.
be more around than you know
Yeah.
yeah
Yeah, I was looking into it for someone that a grower, and they're not rated as very effective.
yeah yeah yeah
I'm also trying to look up the sites that you had mentioned. My computer is being a little slow. Are there any other questions? Again, feel free to mute yourself and ask with your voice or with your fingers in the chat box, whichever
Can you just
works.
go to like Joanne's Fabrics and get netting?
you could absolutely
Okay.
yeah I would. I mean, that's another, I was just being lazy.
No, yeah, I understand, but that's an okay solution.
Absolutely.
Well.
Yeah,
Okay.
because it's really just a physical barrier,
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And I think I found a site about the list of trees they affect. And Tracy, can you mention the timeline of their emergence and their life cycle above ground?
Yes. And so we should see them emerging in about, I don't know, 2, 3, 4 weeks max, depending on the weather. Then, it's going to happen pretty quickly. It'll be over basically. The adults will all be gone by middle of July or so. So it's, like I said, it's short. It's about a month of really crazy activity with a little bit on either end.
Yeah, I was thinking that we were on time for them to be earlier with the way soil temperatures were going, but today kind of really cooled down.
Tracy, do you know if dogwoods are susceptible?
Yeah, dogwoods. That's a good one.
And redbuds.
Redbuds. I think I've read that they will lay in red buds, but I don't know how susceptible they are. I don't know. It's not a favorite host. Like I said, oaks and maples are the big ones. I should have put that in for you guys. I apologize. Like sort of the, all of the full list.
Yeah, Rick mentions in the chat that he believes the USDA Forest Service does maintain a list.
They do.
I am trying to find a link, but my computer is giving me a lot of difficulties trying to do multiple things at once. Wendy, I don't. Late July is you'll be able to uncover before that. They tend to last somewhere about 6 weeks. Is that correct? So somewhere between to the end of June is what we're probably looking at more.
Yeah, I mean, but by the middle of July, everybody should be dead.
Yeah, I think you'll know.
Yeah, you'll know. You will definitely know. Yeah.
Well, if there's no other questions,
Emily?
yes.
What day do
We
they
were-
lay their eggs?
We were living in Odenton in 2004, and it's amazing how loud it is. You can be driving down the road with your windows up and you'll easily hear the sound.
Yeah. And the sound, I mean, the decibels that they produce can be, like I said, louder than a lawnmower, a Harley motorcycle. It's amazing how loud they can be, especially when they're chorusing together.
I'm kind of excited, so.
Yeah, did anybody believe they're now magical and not menacing?
I do. I think we had another question. I can't see your name, but you're listed as WVM Jack. Your question was kind of cutting in and out, so if you wouldn't mind asking that again.
Yeah, just at what time of day do they lay their eggs?
Let's see, I think it's mostly during the day, but don't hold me to that.
We also have fig trees, so I'll be able to tell you if they lay on fig trees.
I'd be curious. Yeah. How tall are your fig trees?
No, they're less than 6 feet because they're in pots.
Okay.
And another question, is there a particular part of the county that has more than others?
I don't know the answer to that question. Does anybody on the presentation here tonight did anybody have pretty big populations last time around that were here in 2004? I know I was working in Summit Point at a site, and holy moly, they had a lot of cicadas. During the last one, we were doing some research, and so, yeah.
A friend told me that in 2004, out River Road, outside of Shepherdstown, there were quite a few.
Mm-hmm. Certainly where we have bigger forested areas, that's what supports the larger populations overall.
Tracy, Tim over at the fruit farm said that they didn't have as many in the 17 years ago, because Henry Hogmeyer was looking forward to it, and they very disappointed. And Henry.
Yeah, of course. And Mary Beth, we didn't have that many on the farm either. We had some, but it wasn't as many. But I remember also going out to Orr's fruit farm, for a project we were doing out there, and they had some newly planted trees, and they were pretty impressive on parts of their farm. Yeah.
They were at Butler's too, down Melville Arden Road.
Yeah.
And Todd Butler's, they had a lot, and there was a lot in Emily's neighborhood where she lives. So I know I got a lot of calls from over around that area because they were finding albino ones.
Oh, when they first emerge and they haven't hardened off yet.
Okay, that's what it is. Okay. Yeah. Because I tried to preserve them, and they turn in alcohol, so they don't stay.
Yeah. So you're gonna see those, like you were saying, like these albino looking cicadas, but they'll harden up in about a day or two. So yeah.
So next time I get a call, I'll just say, do they have blue eyes?
1 in a million.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And the last question in the chat is, do they call all night or only during the day?
I think it's mainly during the day. But we're all going to find out in about 3 weeks.
That's true.
Yeah.
I live in the Bakerton area, and they were just deafening here. And just a couple of days ago, I went kind of a trench around the flower bed, and there were holes every couple inches as I dug.
Yeah. Yeah. They're not far from the surface right now. They're pretty close. Yeah.
And there's also a very nice link someone dropped in the chat about cicada ice cream. So thank you for that. All right. If there's no other questions, I'm going to actually, I think I popped that link in the, oh, I did, in the wrong person. Okay, so I just popped the link in the chat on that list of few different the few different trees that are affected. And like someone else messaged me, the USDA does have a list. I can't seem to locate that well. And then other University of Maryland, other extension sources also just have some general information, list a few species, but definitely not an exhaustive list on those that are affected. So Tracy, that was wonderful. I definitely learned a lot about cicadas, and I'm actually getting a little excited now. So
Yeah. It'll be fun. It'll be fun. It'll be over before you know it though. So, and then we're waiting.
There's actually a cookbook too for people that are interested, but you have to go out and catch them between like midnight and 4 a.m. The nymphs as they crawl up the tree. That's when they say they're best to eat.
Really? Why
Yes.
is that, Mary Beth?
Because they're soft. They're just coming out of the ground.
Oh, this is
Soft
before,
stage. Before they get the hard shells on. And
Yeah.
that's recommending, because there's a whole
Yeah.
recipe book. Somebody, I think it's through the University of Maryland, did it for their graduate thesis. So there's a whole cookbook on.
Yeah. Oh, that makes sense.
I'll try and remember to send you the link.
Yeah.
it's fascinating. People definitely have fun with it. It's such a rare event, so it's hard not to.
Yeah, I have a cat that likes dog day cicadas as well, so we refer to them as yard shrimp. So think of them as lawn shrimp.
Hey, Tracy, this is Liz McGowan.
Hi, Liz.
And this was just wonderful. And I shared it with my son in Charlottesville, and he had the grandkids listening, and he said they loved it.
Tell them they are the cutest, and I hope they get to enjoy some cicadas.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm talking, this one is a 9-year-old and a almost 6-year-old, so
Yeah,
they got a lot out of it.
That's
and
great.
I'm so glad I shared it with them. Yeah. So thank you. You're the best.
Liz, I'm glad you're able to get on. And for anybody else, we are recording this, so we will pop it up probably on YouTube.
Oh, that would be great.
So we'll send that to everybody that registered so they can share it as they see
Yeah.
fit.
Tracy, you should share it with the Shepherdstown community Facebook page. I think people would really like it. I thought about it too late.
Okay.
But, that would be a good thing because, we'll all be affected. So will they be in Charlottesville, Virginia much? I couldn't tell from the map.
They're on the map, but let me just look at the county map again. Hang on. Maybe, Liz, maybe. They're kind of on the edge. It's
So not
just-
so much, not as much as we're going to have them.
Yeah, they're
Okay.
Brood. They were part of a lot of Central Virginia was Brood 2. That was 2013.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks.
And Tracy, could you just pop that link to the map in the chat box?
Sure can. Let me do that for you right now. Sorry, have to get my link up again.
It's okay.
Okay. Why is this being so difficult? I'm just going to put this article in because I can't get it's given me a PDF. So if you scroll down on this, you'll see the map. But it is a U.S. Forest Service, and you can actually download a PDF.
Thank you to both of you.
Did you put that in? I think that was going to everybody in the waiting room. I had to change it to the 2.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I did the same thing when I tried to find a link. It was like,
Okay.
I don't know that that went anywhere.
There it
There
is.
it is. All right. So thank you everybody for tuning in. And thank you, Tracy, for giving us all that wonderful information and sharing her love and all that knowledge of cicadas. We really appreciate your expertise. And I hope everybody's excited to, now everybody's excited to see them here in a few weeks.
Magic cicada. All right. Have a good evening, everybody.
Yes, have a good evening, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks again, Tracy.
Thank you.